But when I say the words service, servant, or serving, what's like the immediate response to that? What do you think? What is your immediate thought, picture in your head? Especially servant or serving, those two things. What do you think?
It sounds basic, but like the server at the restaurant with like the white tie, who's like holding up the tray like that.
Right, a waiter, right? Someone who's bringing you in something. What else?
I just pictured somebody helping another person.
Like what's happening in your picture in your head? What are they helping them with?
I mean, specifically when you said the word servant, I'm thinking of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples.
So Jesus washing feet,
so
right?
Literally what the picture. I was trying to word the picture that was in my head, but that's totally it.
Yeah.
Like
washing feet and then being that like low, right? It's a low.
Like being on your hands and knees, even like with your hands out like this, like.
Right.
So if you take this.
So it's almost a low connotation to it, like lowly, humble. I guess humble would probably be the best word to describe servant. And would you, when I say serving, would you see that as a positive thing or a negative thing? Like feeling wise, think about it. How would you feel about that? Huh? Positive, right? Well, what do you think?
But I think sometimes it can be both. I think
it can be both.
It could get a negative connotation, or there's some things that you might have to do if you were a true servant that could be quote unquote negative or quote unquote uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable,
or something you're not used to.
Right. Yeah, generally we have a positive idea about serving. We see serving as a positive thing. But the actual serving action is seen negatively, and we know that because almost every organization I've ever been close to has a severe lack of volunteers, right? People would never say serving is bad, but it's very difficult to actually get people to serve, right? And so everybody has a positive outlook. Yeah, serving's great. Well, can you serve? Maybe next week, maybe next month, I'll think about it. And that's what happens. And so it's it is a dual thing. Like you said, there's positive and negatives to it. And yes, will be things that in service, which we'll talk about a little bit tonight, are very difficult. And we're going to talk about those as well. How many of you, I guess everybody in here is involved in serving and volunteering, I'm assuming? Is everybody in here volunteering or serving in something somewhere? How has your view of service changed since you started volunteering?
Not either of you guys have to start us off since you guys
I feel like it's more enjoyable after starting, because like I said, looking at it, everyone asks everyone says oh, serving good, and then they get asked to do it, and I don't really want to, but as I did it more and as I helped in my church more, I enjoyed it more and more.
Good.
And it made me, as I did more of it, I wanted to do more of it. So.
Yeah, good deal.
For me, sometimes I've found that it's about doing the small things, because sometimes you're like, this isn't really meaningful, but sometimes it's doing the small things. Like one time I was able to work on a house with a group of people, and I was supposed to just clean the windows, and I was like, this isn't really what I thought I was supposed to be doing.
Right.
And then I kind of had to go back and redo them because I didn't do them good the first time. And so it was kind of one of those things where it was just I don't know, sometimes doing the thing you don't want to do or something that seems small, but that's just part of serving.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of things that we do as far as service-wise doesn't really get recognized, and that we'll talk about a little bit that too. It does seem small, I guess, in the overall scope of things, and a lot of times it's the things that don't get noticed unless they're not done. People only notice when they're not done. But when they're done, you do your job right and you do all your service right, no one notices. It's like you said, cleaning the windows. No one notices clean windows. They only notice dirty windows. Mm-hmm. So service ends up being that a lot of times, where you're doing things like, am I really making a difference? And then, and even when you're counseling and talking to people, I've had several instances with students and stuff where you feel like week after week, you're not making a real impact. You don't see results. You're not seeing fruit. You're not watching things happen. And then one of the students just come by, have a 5-minute conversation with you about how something you said someday made this impact in his life. And you're like, okay. Well then, because you just have to keep doing it. And consistency It's just like, you guys are doing social media stuff. Like the number one problem with people with social media is consistency. People startups and stuff. And it's the same thing with service, it's consistency. It's like, you may not feel like things are happening, but you need to just continue on doing it. But one of the reasons why people don't really get into it is because it's inconvenient. It is never convenient to serve. And I think that's just by default part of it. You are going out of your way to do something for someone else. So serving and service is an idea that can be romanticized or demonized depending on who you talk to, what kind of experiences you've had in the past. And what I want to talk about tonight is kind of give a clear picture of service, serving, and then the servant mindset or heart. And that way you guys know when boots hit the ground, when you're actually doing this work, what to expect, which you already do, because obviously everybody in here is a leader, or at some point you've already done some of this. So I was kind of expecting a little bit more, but we can still do this since we have more than 2 people. So I just need 2 people to serve as illustrations. Does anybody want to volunteer for that? It's real simple. You ain't got to do anything weird. You ain't got to eat anything or anything like that in student ministry. All right. I need one other person to volunteer for this. All right. So I'm going to have, let's see where I want to. Let's just come here. Let's come here really quick. All right. So I'm going to have you do the part. I'm going to hold this pen, okay?
All right.
All right. All you're going to do is you're going to walk from where you are to that door, and you're going to drop the pen about halfway, right about here, right?
All right.
And then you're just going to stand here. When he drops the pen, I want you to walk to where the pen is and to stop, and then we'll kind of go from there, okay? And I'll kind of give further instructions. So go ahead and walk, and just drop it like you didn't even notice it. All right, and you can walk up to where the pen is. So right now, person 1 has a need, right? The pen represents basically any need. It can be anything. He has a need. It's been dropped. And if person 1 has any hope of getting this pen back or getting their need serviced or fulfilled, it's going to be up to person 2 and what they choose to do with this opportunity that's in front of them. They see the need, they know what it is, and obviously in this case it's very simple, but they see it, they know what it is, they have the power to do it, they're in a prime position to fulfill person 1's need. In this case, person 1 doesn't even know what that need is, and that might very well be the case depending on what it is that you go and do in ministry or even in business, especially if you're counseling. If you're in your pastorate or you're counseling people, they may not even know what their need is. And that's obviously a very difficult situation. But many times the need people have is very felt. They understand what it is. So either case, though, the point being person 2 has the prime opportunity to fulfill the need. But a few things have to happen first. So let's just go with the obvious. Go ahead and return the pen to him. All right, so he has to stop, obviously. He has to bend down, pick it up, take it back over, and hand it off to person 1. And essentially, that is what we would call an act of service. It's simple in this respect, but he has performed something for somebody else at the cost of his own energy and time. Now, obviously, in this case, the cost is not very large. The effort was not very much because he's right here in this vicinity. It's not that much to do. But you can expand that illustration and this concept to thousands of miles, months of time, billions of dollars of whatever it might be that needs to go into a disaster or whatever, a need that needs to be filled. Because the concept of service is the same no matter what. Doing something for somebody else at cost to yourself. Essentially, that is what service is. Go ahead and take a seat, and we'll kind of get into what we want to talk about tonight. But the concept is you do something at cost to yourself. That is the reality of what service is. There's no act of service that doesn't cost us something. So you just kind of write that down. That's like a big header for what we're talking about. There's no act of service that doesn't cost us something. And sure, if you enter in the business world, I don't know where you guys are headed or anything like that. Even if you head in the business world and you provide a service with expectation to be paid, the cost is always up front, even for a business owner. You take the risk of the project, you invest your time, your energy, your money, your resources, and that of your staff or of your employees. And then the final payoff is down the road. And companies that serve their customers and are the ones that will flourish in the upcoming decades or so because people desire value, and value is helping people. Chris Gilbo, who is the author of several entrepreneurial books, one, The Art of Nonconformity and the Happiness of Pursuit, I think. He wrote in his other book, The $100 Startup, if you make your business about helping others, you will always have plenty of work. And it's a pillar in almost every entrepreneurial program that I've ever been in, watched or been involved with, that serving people and bringing value to their lives is the key to success. And for example, in 1987, Starbucks was only a regional company in Seattle with 20 stores. I think Howard Schultz took it over in 87, and in 4 years, there were 100 Starbucks. And then by obviously today, it's 2,500 Starbucks around the world in 12 different countries. If you ever have a chance to go to New York City, they are pretty much on every corner. If you walk in Manhattan, it's sometimes on the same building, just on different ends of the block. You'll find 3 or 4 of them attached to the same building. But he is quoted as saying, we are not in the coffee business serving people. We are in the people business serving coffee. And so he saw serving people as his business and used coffee to do that. So regardless of whether you end up in ministry and at a church or an organization, or work as an employee, or you become a next, big startup entrepreneur, the idea of serving others must be a foundational component of your mindset, no matter what you do. And it's there for us to understand, and it's been proven by people who obviously have done it. And the idea that the successful enterprises and organizations are built around serving people really shouldn't surprise us as followers of Christ, because the principle is basically written down almost all over the place. Luke 22:26 says that he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, he as chief, as he that serves. And in Matthew 23, the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whosoever exalts himself or lifts himself up or boasts of himself will be humbled, but he that humbles himself will be exalted. And I've read a lot of books, a lot of chapters, a lot of YouTube videos and podcasts and all this other stuff that have to do with success, self-improvement, even entrepreneur mindsets and stuff like that. And it's amazing to me how many of their mind-blowing principles they think are new are just reworked principles found in God's Word. And where, like I said, whether you're in ministry or not, these things are here. And serving and service is a prime example. But there is a reason why we don't see a lot of people do this, even though it's proven to work. Even whether in ministry, you'll find people who don't want to serve. You will find that. They just, I know people think, well, if they're in ministry, of course they're serving. No, they're really not. Not everybody serves who's in ministry. A lot of people are just there like people are at a job to get a paycheck. And they don't practice these principles for one simple reason, and that is that acts of service are difficult. And so we're going to look at first a few reasons why it's difficult, and then a few reasons why the servant's heart or mindset will still serve anyways, regardless of the difficulties that are there. And the greatest illustration, obviously, of service that's most well known is the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10. If you have a Bible, you can go to Luke chapter 10. If not, you can kind of listen to me ramble on. But in context, Jesus in Luke 10 is interacting with people who are always trying to find a way to limit the amount of service that they provide to the people around them. That's their desire. They have found loopholes in that culture. They were pros at finding loopholes and caveats and conditions for every command that God had given them to serve, to help, and to support people around them. They found ways to create. Jesus rebukes them, I think, in the end of Matthew, rebukes them of trying to find ways not to care for their parents, for taking the houses away from widows and those who are poor. Obviously, when he drives them out of the temple in the beginning of one gospel, the end of the other. He's doing it because they're using the temple to basically rob people who are worshiping. And all the time they claim that they are worshipers of God, that they're following the truth. And because they kind of hide behind their traditions and things they had made up and added to God's word and try to find ways around what God had simply said. And so Jesus speaks this parable to cut through the noise that the culture had created to drown out the simple command of love your neighbor as yourself. Because that's the simplest command. Right? To love your neighbor as yourself. There shouldn't be any ambiguity about that. And yet they found some. So they kind of created it. So the story in Luke 10 here I'm just going to give the cliff notes until we get down to the part I want to kind of cover. The story starts with a Jewish man traveling from Jerusalem down to another city called Jericho, right? And due to the geography and the weather patterns of that place, is very dry, very arid, very desolate, dangerous place for the guy to be traveling in and going to. There's cliffs, there's canyons, there's crevasses, there's all this stuff that could happen. And for 18 miles it is from the one place to the other, it would be extremely dangerous for someone to do that. And the audience of Jesus would know that. They would know the road, they would know where they're going, and they could probably guess what's happening next. When he says, this dude's going by himself from one place down to Jericho, they're like, oh, this guy's going to get robbed. And exactly is what happens to him. He is attacked, he's robbed, he's stripped and left dead, or left for dead. And that's our person one, right? Person one had a need that was very obvious to anybody who would have seen it and who would have viewed where he was at. And the Jericho road being as inhospitable as it was makes that dude's situation that much worse. If somebody does not help him, he will die 100%, right? That's his state of being. That's where he's at. He cannot help himself. So he must be found, he must be served, helped, or rescued by somebody else. It's no way he's surviving the situation if someone doesn't do that. But the good thing for the dude is that the trail is very narrow, right? That's part of why it was so treacherous, because there wasn't a whole lot of room for people to kind of go different directions. So if someone decides to travel down that road, they're going to see him. It's impossible for them to be like, well, I didn't see anything. I'm just going to keep on walking or whatever. And so if someone sees him, they should see him. They should, if someone comes down that way, they should see him. Jesus continues by saying that two people, a priest and a Levite, who essentially is an employee of the temple, by chance could by this guy on the ground. And the priest doesn't even stop. And it says he crossed by on the other side of the road. But the reality is there wasn't much of an other side. So he's almost stepping over this guy to skirt past him and ignore the situation. He is just not interested at all. He makes a clear mental decision to indifference, to skirt around the guy and keep on walking. The Levite, it says, comes on later, takes a little bit longer to look at the man. So he looks at him, but ultimately he decides the same thing the priest does. He crosses by, skirts around the guy, he's like walking like this against the wall to stay away from him, and he goes on his little merry way. Last of all, the Samaritan passes by, and that's where the story takes a dramatic turn that we know that it does. And this is where we bring in the words of Jesus. So there in Luke chapter 10, verse 33, it says, a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, the guy on the ground. And when he saw him, he had compassion on him. He went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring in wine and oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, brought him to an inn, took care of him. And on the morrow, or the next day, he departed, took 2 pence, or 2 denarii, 2 pennies basically, gave them to the host and said, take care of him. Whatsoever you spend more, when I come again, I will repay you. Which of these 3 do you think was neighbor unto him that fell among thieves? And he said, he that showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said, go and you do likewise, or do the same thing. And as I said, let's look at the difficulties that the Samaritan found in his service to this guy that he basically had to overcome, that the other 2 did not. And that way we can kind of set up where we are as we serve. So we're prepared for the things that kind of come our way. Number 1, it's difficult to serve because not everybody you serve will like you. The Samaritans and the Jews were racially, religiously, and basically class-wise divided from each other. More from the Jews towards Samaritans. But either way, what that means, though, is that if the roles had been reversed, it's doubtful that the Samaritan would have received the same kind of treatment that he gave, just according to how culture was. So not everybody you'll serve will be like you. They won't look like you. They won't sound like you. They won't even believe like you. And it's not guaranteed they'll even appreciate what it is that you do for them. And we kind of talked about that earlier. And that's just a reality of serving. Jesus in Mark 10, after saying that those who wish to be great in the kingdom must be a servant, he uses himself as an example, in that he says that even I came not to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom, obviously for many. And so he said, I came to serve other people, and if he's the Son of God and he's serving, then he is obviously demonstrating that the greatest must serve. But then he vividly demonstrates that a few days later when he hangs on a cross, serving all humanity by carrying their sin, and still says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because all his life, all he did was serve others. And yet, in the end of the day, he's crucified for it. Yet, in the middle of them crucifying him for doing nothing, he is still serving them in the middle of the pain and the suffering he has by praying for their forgiveness. So not everybody that we serve will necessarily appreciate what we do for them or even like us. And that's just the way it is. And maybe in this setting, that may not be true. But I don't know how far you will go in your service. I don't know where you'll work. I don't know what country you'll go to. I don't know what city you might end up working in. And this may be the reality for you. Number 2, every time you serve, we kind of covered this. Every time you serve, it'll cost you. Here we covered, as I said, we covered this a little bit, but look at all the stuff it took for the Samaritan to complete his service to the injured man. Let's just read these 2 verses again. He went to him, bound up his wounds, poured in oil and wine, set him on his own beast, and brought him into the inn and took care of him. And on the morrow he departed, or the next day, took 2 pence, gave him to the host, said, take care of him, basically. Anything you spend more, I'll repay you when I come again. But number 1, he went to him and bound up his wounds. So he's on a donkey, it says that. He's on his beast, his donkey or whatever. And he gets off, and he gets down. And so this is an inconvenience, as we said earlier. And he is taking time from that point to make sure that this guy is served and that he is helped. And from that point. But it's inconveniencing him. Whatever plans he had that day for where he was going in the direction he was headed, immediately were put on hold and canceled and brought down to this point. So inconvenience is always going to be a part of our service. It will cost us obviously time, and there are other things we could do. There's always other things we could be doing. Reality is to serve is to inconvenience ourselves. And so he had to unpack his kit, which was not easy. He has to bind up this guy's wounds. Obviously that's not just laying on him somewhere. There's not a Medipack by his head, he can just throw on the guy. And so he has to unpack all his stuff, further inconvenience, more time, and then he begins to use his own supplies, his own wine, his own oil, which are very costly things. The reality is he either had gone to Jerusalem to buy those things and were taking them home, which then in that case it would have been his, or he was transporting them to sell them in Jericho or somewhere else. Either way, what he's carrying is something that would have cost a lot of money. It wasn't just like oil and wine running around everywhere. And so at great cost to himself, in his time, his day, his schedule, and his own personal possessions, he is trying to do his best to serve this guy. He then sets the guy on his donkey and walks the rest of the way on foot. So he's not only at cost of his material resources, but he's actually putting himself out there, and he is serving this guy to the best of his ability, even physically speaking. And then he spends the night looking after him. It says that he took him to the inn and took care of him, and then the next day is when he departed. So he spends all night with this guy who most likely is feverish. He's heat stroke because of where the area was. Infection, he's probably unconscious, probably delirious. He spends the night making sure that the guy, he probably stayed up all night, I'm assuming, because that's what it would take with someone in that particular situation. The kind of damage the guy would have taken, one, by being beat, stripped naked, and then left in the sun to bake. He would be in super rough shape. It's not just like, oh, he's got a scrape or a bruise. Like, he has to spend this time with him, making sure this guy survives. And so he does that. All of that inconvenience and cost and everything else that he has put up for this guy, he's willing to do it. He had full commitment to the end that the guy might survive. It wasn't virtue signaling. It wasn't him trying to calm his own conscience, like handing the dollar bill to the guy in the corner that you see and you feel kind of bad. So you're like, and he's right beside your door and you're like, you know what, dude, here's a dollar bill, go buy yourself some food. And that's not what he's doing. He is going as far as he can. He has other things to do. He leaves the next morning first thing. So whatever he was doing was important, but this guy's need superseded all those things, and he took into account what this guy did or what this guy had happened to him, and that what he would need to do in order to survive. And so he is, as I said, treating full capacity, regardless of how he might have been treated in reverse. So number 3, you will not always be recognized or rewarded for every act of service. which is usually where most people get, fall off. They expect to be either rewarded, have plaques to be put on their wall or something, which I don't know why you'd want that, but some people like that kind of stuff. But you will not always be recognized or rewarded for the things that you do. The end of the parable does not show any communication between the Samaritan and the man. It's very likely the dude wasn't be conscious for days due to the kind of damage that he had gone through. And so the Samaritan's not sitting there waiting for him to wake up and be like, hey, dude, I saved your life. You owe me or whatever. He is not telling the innkeeper, make sure you tell everybody that I'm the hero of the story. He's not, in our sense, taking a selfie with the guy in his story, telling about how good he is. In fact, the story never calls him good. We label him good because of what he showed us about the heart, the mindset of what a true servant is. So those three things, there will always be a cost. That not everybody you serve will like you. There'll always be a cost, and you will not always be recognized for it. And the Samaritan just leaves. He doesn't care. He's not there for glory. He's not there for recognition. He just wants to do to survive. He saw a guy in need, person one, as we demonstrated, and he is doing whatever it takes to fulfill that need. So in the next section, what the servant's heart looks like. Number one, as I said, he shows us what that servant's heart looks like. The servant heart is one of compassion. And compassion essentially is empathy in action. And empathy is feeling for somebody else. It's more than pity kind of, but it means you feel for them. It's not just you feel bad, but you feel for them. You kind of put yourself in their shoes. But compassion is empathy in action. It not only is being moved in your heart. We often see videos of wars and diseases and different things around the world right now. And maybe you see someone, as I said, on the street in a condition, and we kind of are moved with pity. We feel something for them, but we don't move to act necessarily. Either we can't. I can't go around the world and fix everything that's going on, right? Now, the guy in the corner, I might be able to do something about. But pity that doesn't translate to action is useless. The Levite had pity on the man as he stops and takes a look at it and looks at him. But the pity of the Levite would have left him just as dead as the indifference of the priest, right? Because he didn't act, he didn't do anything. And so you can kind of write this as a conclusion for that point. A servant isn't satisfied with pity, but is moved to action by compassion. And that's always going to be the case. You act out of compassion, which is really a form of love, a desire for that person to be made well, and that they are filled in the need that they have. So, number two, a servant's heart is, as I said, one of action. One of the most dangerous things in the world is inaction. The refusal to accept the situation and take the necessary actions to remedy it. This has led to wars, to international crises that we know in history, and many human rights atrocities around the world, one of which being World War II, which we all kind of know about. But following World War I, there would be a guy who would kind of be known for inaction. And moving towards World War II, which we know Adolf Hitler was doing all the stuff that he was doing. As he was doing those things, leading up to the war, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was known for his appeasement strategy in trying to appease Hitler. He would go and meet with him. He would try and work out deals with him. And as Hitler would just kind of use him and keep doing what he was doing behind the scenes and whatever. And at the end of the day, his inaction would lead to basically to the beginning of World War II, which would obviously lead to the millions and millions of lives that would be lost because of inaction, because he didn't take what was happening and actually do something about it. He wanted to just kind of be like, let it alone. He's just kind of a crazy German. He'll be okay if we just keep giving him stuff. And obviously that didn't happen. And history doesn't deal kindly with those who choose a safe middle ground of comfort and action and inaction, but well remembers those who see dire situations and choose to act selflessly on behalf of those in need. And that's the third thing. A servant's heart is one of selflessness. Or it is a mindset that is not set on self, but set on others. And though we kind of discussed some of the beneficial things that come from serving as far as business is concerned in our lives in general, and there are positive things. I'm not covering everything about servanthood tonight, obviously. There are definitely positive things that come from serving. These are the difficult parts, and this is what overcomes that, is being selfless. And many times the real payoff is simply to know that I am reflecting the heart of Christ, and that we are able to help somebody. And it could be just that simple, and there's nothing else really to it. When you go into an act of service expecting reward, generally you're going to be disappointed because it just isn't what you expect it to be. And you could, as this guy did, he spent a lot of money and time for this guy to survive. And he said he was willing to go even farther. He tells the guy, if he doesn't get better and you have to spend more money to get him to heal, I'll pay that too. He was willing to go all the way to make sure that his act of service was complete and not halfway. And this is key, and this is kind of where I want to end. The key to true impactful service is what I call selfless indifference. And we're going to kind of talk about what that means in a second. In my first job way back in the day, I was like 14 or 15 in a church. We had these new glass doors that we kind of replaced these old wooden gross doors with or whatever. And, and glass doors, like we were talking about earlier, washing glass doors look great when they're clean. But glass doors are generally always covered with people's fingerprints and, the boogers of kids who are walking through them and stuff like that and sticking their tongue on them. And so one day the pastor comes to me and says, Will, I got a job for you. He handed me a rag and some Windex. And from then on, I was the door window washer or whatever, right? And I would do it before service and then sometime while the service was going on. And it was, again, one of those things, no one sees, no one knows, unless you're not doing it right? And so, it was just one of those things, and as I said, most of our acts of service will be that way. But to be honest with you, I never really thought about it. I was just happy to be doing something. And that's what I kind of call the paradox of compassion or moving to action and indifference. Because indifference towards people and their need is the number one enemy to a life dedicated to service. The very indication that compassion is necessary in our life is seen because that's the only time the story shifts. We know that they all three went to the same place on the same road, doing the same thing and met the same guy in the same condition. The only difference was compassion for the one man. And so the Samaritan shows deep compassion for the man's need. But in reverse, he shows deep indifference towards himself and to what it would cost him. He does not pull back at all the entire time from the cost. He is indifferent towards what it will cost him to give this guy life again. His compassion moved him. His indifference allowed him to continue until the job basically was done, the act of service was done. And so the servant's heart is both compassionate and indifferent. It's consumed with compassion for the one's needs, but it's void of concern and indifference towards the cost, because obviously our example is Christ. If he gave all that he gave, then I am going to pursue my acts of service with everything I have. So, and these things, we learn that we ought to be indifferent to what it's going to cost us. We should be compassionate enough to go to the end of those things. And the lesson of that is really learned by experience. It's not something you can just be told, but it's something you need to know up front. That the cost will be there, but we need to choose to do what's right no matter what. The ability to understand the difficulties of serving, but accept it anyways because you know it needs to be done. People need to be served and goals need to be hit and all those things is an invaluable asset to a true servant. You have to be able to see, yeah, it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to do it anyways. And that's what Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 6. He said, if you do your giving in secret, you do your service in secret, and your Father which sees in secret will reward you. And then the last piece of this is the servant lifestyle is not for everyone. But those who pursue it are the ones who at the end of the day, just like the Samaritan, will be the ones who actually make the difference. You cannot make a difference in someone's life and make an impact without that cost being there. It's part of it. That's what service is. It is a cost. It is me giving myself so that someone else can be better. And whatever that looks like, whether it's in a company, whether it's in a church, organization, or here in college, and this in your group that you do, and the things you go to youth groups and different things you said, and that you clean up around campus, and all the stuff you do, that costs your time. It costs your effort. Nobody came around probably. I'm sure a few people came around. Man, thanks for cleaning up the campus. I mean, how many people thank you for cleaning up campus? 2, right?
Aside from the people who did it.
Yeah, besides the people that did it. So, I mean, is it good that you did it? 100%. I mean, I hate seeing trash. If I had known seen you guys, I would be down here thanking you for that, because that's a big, pet peeve of mine. But you don't get, people notice that if there was trash everywhere, but they're not going to be like, hey man, great job, thing. And that's just part of it. So service is always going to be that selfless cost. And the true servant accepts it, because he's indifferent to that. He wants to help no matter what. And that's kind of what we have. I want to end maybe with some question answer, or just some insights that maybe you've had in your life of serving. Anything you guys could add or would like to add to what we said tonight? Or any questions, anything, whatever. I mean, what are some of the biggest hurdles you've run up against in serving to this point in your life?
I think sometimes when you serve often in a particular area, whether it's like the church or a group or ministry or anything like that, and you get comfortable in your service and you get good at that part of service, and then there comes a time where you're either like given like leadership or a partner or like a different route of using it, and then having to relinquish the control of, I've gotten into my groove now, how do I split roles, how do I change things, how do I bring new people into everything that's like going on in my brain, and like I have to put it on paper now.
Right, yeah.
Like I started out the summer in the coordinator position with no leaders, and then over time the Lord provided different leaders, and now we're a team of 4. And I'm not gonna lie with y'all, this maybe it's a secret. It was a hurdle to like get over, like how do I share my roles, how do I relinquish that control and let the control being in someone else's hands.
That's the biggest issue. I don't know, we don't really talk about this tonight, but that is the biggest issue when shifting from being the only person doing something, like you said, to a team. And I remember, because my ministry in Florida when I worked there was all bivocational. So I was basically volunteer, and I worked a full-time job. And when I did that, I was a project manager for a construction contractor. When I started, I wasn't. I was like a trash carrier, dude, right? So I'd carry trash, do stuff. And I learned as quick as I could, and I moved up to when I left, I was managing several different job sites, different cities, different stuff like that, right? But the biggest hurdle I had from moving from trash carrier and manual labor dude who's doing work to when my boss moved me to be a superintendent or supervisor was not coming into a job and trying to do someone's job for them, to let them do it, to let, like you said, to transfer that responsibility to someone else, because you know it, like you know how to do it, you know what's going on, and it's difficult to watch somebody make mistakes. And what you learn is when you transfer from being like somebody by yourself into leadership, and you have to delegate some of those things, is you have to be willing to let people not fail, but to do things either wrong or different from what you do in them. It's difficult to do that because you want it, it's like when I do video and stuff, because I can see it and I know how I want it. And I've had 2 kids do it the last 2 weeks because I've been preaching in Thrive in the youth group. And I go back and watch it and I'm like, but it don't matter because they are learning something. They are serving and they're getting into something. And obviously I can't expect them to be absolutely 100% on it. And it's difficult to let go of that thing. So I hear that, because it was one, my boss told me, he said, you can't just go there and do that work. It's like, you're supposed to watch the job. And I felt bad because I felt like I wasn't doing work, because when you switch and, in that respect, but it is difficult. It's 100% difficult to just, to do those things, to do that. So, anything else? It can be anything. It doesn't even have to be about what we talked about tonight. I mean, that was kind of about leadership and servant leadership. So I've done a lot of stuff. I mean, I've been, like I said, obviously I was a project manager, been student pastor, associate pastor now. Counsel in youth prisons. I've done backyard Bible clubs, missions trips all over the place. Done a lot of stuff the last 20 years or so. So if you have any kind of questions about any of it. Trev, you seem like you're trying to figure something out.
Yeah, I've been pondering the question for like the last 5 minutes. How do I word this? How would you say, from the perspective of a leader, but also of a servant too, how have you found the best way is to not only lead and serve people, but more specifically to equip those people that you're leading and you're serving to do I guess, do a good job or learn or like be able to take the reins or take the keys from you one day or be able to go out, whether they leave your church or leave your company or leave your group or anything like that?
Yeah.
How do you equip them with the tools necessary to do that in a good way?
Good question. I mean, one is you obviously gonna have to intentionally train. You have to be intentional about it. If you have somebody who's under you, it can't be just like, okay, follow me around, just do what I tell you to do, because they won't learn that way. They'll always be waiting for commands, and so you can't just do that. You have to be able to give them something, and this is what I had to do. When I learned to kind of let go and delegate, I would have to go to a job site. I would tell them, this is what I need you to do. I would show them if I needed to. And then I would have to leave and then come back later and to see and check how they did, right? And so you do have to have that aspect of trust. You teach them intentionally. You describe to them what they should be doing. And then, like I said with this, there are points you have to let them try and do it on their own. Especially if you're going to leave somewhere, you want to transfer not just the knowledge of what to do, but you want to transfer the heart of what you're doing to them, like the importance of your ministry or your business or whatever you're trying to transfer out of. Like, they need to understand, look, this is not just like show up on this day and do this and go home, especially not ministry, at least. Like, it's your whole life. And so you want to convey that to them, your heart. So you have one-on-one conversations. A lot of things that how I like to teach is in process. So like while I'm working, I have a guy with me and I'll be talking to him about it. Hey, this is why we do certain things. I love to explain why, because if they can figure out why, they can usually figure out how to do it. I don't need to tell someone how to do something if they know like the process, like the basic process and why we do things a certain way, and then they can kind of figure out their own way because they're going to do something different. And that's like one of the hardest parts is when someone does something different from the way you would do it, but it works. You got to be like, all right, you know what? I'll just let that go.
Or if like it doesn't align with your vision.
Yeah.
That you're like striving towards, and now it's like,
Yeah, if you are the leader, if there is a set vision and like it goes completely opposite, then you might have to correct it. You know what I mean? Like if you want to take your organization or your thing in a certain direction and you're starting to let people do it and they're just like, you know what, I'd rather just do this, and it's like way out here. Then that comes into the other aspect of leadership, which is the harder part, which is correcting people, which is a part I always have problems with. I don't want to correct people. I don't want to be mean or angry, but you just have to come at it like, look, this is the vision, and I don't care necessarily exactly how you do everything. I'm going to micromanage you, but we were going this way, and now we're going that way, and that doesn't seem to be, unless it's a better one. We also have to be humble enough to be like, you know what, that works better. But, you have that's an individual basis kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, if someone goes way off base and you've accessed it and you're like, you know what, I really don't want to go that direction, and you need to correct it. That's a big thing in churches. A lot of pastors don't like conflict and they won't deal with some random dude who's like taking half his church in some direction that's not doctrinal or something, and or whatever it might be. And that's the harder part of leadership, I think. I think it's more enjoyable to teach and to do and to have conversations and to transfer vision, but it's really difficult to steer the ship, especially if it's going way off course. So yeah.
What do you guys think? Do you have any other questions or thoughts about serving or service or having a service heart?
I don't have any questions, but it's just a statement of like the hurdles. One of my biggest hurdles was working at the hospital at night and then having to serve at church. Not having to because I want to.
Right.
Serve as an usher at church and being able to stay up hours to do that. And that's a lot of dedication, and it shows that I want to serve the Lord and this is what I want to do. But having that job to work every night was very hard, so I had to change that because mentally that was draining me.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it may make me feel, I don't want to go, but I do go because that's what I want to do. And I was like, well, I can't let that job be the reason why I don't serve. Mm-hmm. But I never did let that happen. So I just changed, my position in the job. So it worked out better.
Right.
Let's keep going off of that. What is like the greatest hurdle or struggle that you guys have faced within serving? I know I shared mine earlier and Brianna just shared hers, but to the 5 of you guys, let's just go around.
I would say expectation, which is, I feel like it's selfish. Sometimes I feel like I expect more of others once I like do this, I don't want to say go above and beyond. It's almost like when you are like, almost, you're like serving them to another, like I would say in a good way.
Yeah.
It's almost like you expect them to kind of do it to you. And sometimes when it's like situations where it's like, dang, you weren't really like this to me, and I was like this to you. I'm like, I don't know how to feel about that. It's just one of those things where I'm like, I guess I'm like, am I expecting too much of them as in like, it's almost selfish to me to expect that because I can't control that? Or is it like me just saying like, you have the capacity to do it to me as well, like I do it to you, so it's almost like I expect you to do that to me as well,
Yep.
It's one of those things where like I struggle with that because I don't want to be like, it feels like a negative mindset where it's like, man, because it kind of like makes me like think like, if I do this and this doesn't happen, I'm like, then why do I do this for them? You know what I mean? It's like, why do I do things for them if this doesn't happen to me? Kind of, I feel like that's just like sometimes I'm just struggling with trying to get over and trying to like, I guess like, it doesn't like necessarily matter. It's like, I know what I'm doing for them. And, it doesn't matter what they do to me. I just know that I like to do it to them. They don't have to do it to me back because it's not like it needs to happen, you know what I mean? Something in that area.
Yeah.
Just trying to deal with that. So.
Samantha?
Well, I guess I kind of had a question about it. I don't really know how to phrase it. I guess like the balance of like, you talk about like not letting your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Like, not like showing off what you're doing to be like, oh, like I want people to validate me and like be like, oh, she's such a good person or like something like that. But also like balancing like sharing experiences you've had to like teach others. Like I guess like what's the balance of that?
Yeah, I mean, because you don't want to be like, hey, look at me. You don't be the guy with the selfie, right? Look at me. Look at what I'm doing today. But you do also have to convey to someone else, like we're talking about the vision and the heart of it and what you've done and been able to do. It's difficult. I think sometimes you just have to, if you need to tell somebody and talk to them about it, just ask God, like, help me with my motives. I don't want to be the wrong motive. I just help me when I speak to this person about this. And I have to do that sometimes because you start talking about yourself, you always feel like, do I want to talk about that? But like you said, it might be necessary. And again, God, help my motives to be right. Help my motives to be right. And what you're saying, that struggle is always there. And we kind of talked about it a little bit. I don't know if you were in here yet or not, but that this Good Samaritan never really was recognized for what he did. Because the dude was unconscious when he leaves or whatever. And there is no dialogue. There's never dialogue between the Samaritan and the guy who's injured. And we talked about how the racial problems that were between the Jews and the Samaritans at that time would probably say that the Jew, had he been reversed, would not have done that for him because of the struggles that were between them. And so that's a definite struggle because I think all of us, especially if you pour your heart into something, and I've seen it, especially in youth ministry, you pour your heart into some students and you watch them, like someone will turn around. I've had a student and I poured my life into this kid. A lot of struggle with this kid. One day he told me, it was a long time after the fact, he's like, you know what, you're just some pastor and you don't mean anything. And just walked away and all mad and angry about it. And just, he basically told me he hated me. And then you think about it, you're like, what? Like, what did I even do? Did I make a difference? But you do. I mean, you do in the ones who come up to you and say something else. But either way, I think the indifference towards that cost, I think, is the key to that. You have to, as you said, think that it doesn't matter. Hey, I'm doing what I know is right. I'm trying to serve. People don't appreciate it. That's not on me. What is on me is to do it. Now, obviously, there's probably a limit to that. If it's like they're belligerent towards you, then there might be a limit to that. But we're not really talking about those details right now. So, there is a limit to it. And then obviously mental health. You talk about like your mind. If you've got so much on your plate, there is definitely times you got to say that's too much. Because you have to take care of your mind, your mental health, and all that kind of stuff, which you guys were just talking about. It's an important thing. It's very important. So,
I know one thing I've always struggled with, like trying to serve is both like finding time in my schedule to do it, or just like time constraints of it, as well as like feeling like I'm not qualified for it or being scared to do it because I don't think I'm cut out for it. That's always been something that I've like, it's made me not want to like volunteer to do stuff. I've been getting better about it in recent years, but in the past it was always like a big thing of both the time commitment and then fitting time into my schedule and just feeling like I wasn't cut out for it. So why would I do it if I'm not going to be good at it?
Right.
Yeah. And the kid, Trevor?
I think a big thing that like I've noticed is I have a really hard time when I'm serving and it's rejected, and it's like somebody, I'm pouring my heart and they don't appreciate it. They don't, but not even like I don't need recognition.
Right.
Like that's not something I strive for, but just like flat out like I don't want the food you're trying to give me.
Right.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like, but I don't know. I just have a hard time like choosing to help even when they don't want the help.
Yep. It's hard. It's hard.
Sure.
Yeah, I would say I think just meeting people or meeting the person you're serving or pouring into or anything like that, I think meeting them where they're at is always something, there's always kind of a struggle, especially if it's with something that you've been through in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's so easy, or at least how I operate sometimes, I think it's so easy to kind of try to like serve somebody or like pour into them in a certain way, like almost from like this like mountain where you've already climbed up the mountain, you've already like faced this struggle, this battle, this problem, you're there, you've been there, you've done it. And so you're speaking from the mountain, but they're still in this valley. And so like they're not gonna understand because like you were once where they were at, but you've already beat it and faced it. 'Cause it's like it's almost, I don't know, like you're on the mountaintop, they're in the valley, and they're like, hey, meet them where they're at and not speaking over their head or not expecting them just to get it immediately, because obviously you didn't at one point in time. It was a learning process.
Yeah. Remembering where you came from.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, for time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and pray us out. But for a couple of people that came in late, if you guys want to talk to him more, he had some really great stuff to share. So, like, get his notes, get his verses. Maybe he can give you the spiel quickly or whatever. And if you guys have any more questions for Will or for me, like, please feel free afterwards. We're doing some filming for our mental health day video. So if Brianna and Jalen, I would love to use you guys in the video also. If you have a couple minutes to stay back, it's a 2-question interview, basically. So yeah, if that's it, I think I'm going to go ahead and pray us out now.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for Will and his eagerness to serve, Lord, his willingness to teach. Thank you for equipping him in his voice and his tongue to speak the words of you. Thank you for the way he has taught me and every person in this room tonight. Lord, I pray that as we go out into the rest of the week, that we will humble our hearts under you, Lord, and that we will continue to serve you, even if it means that we are at cost, even if it means that we do not get recognition, even if it means we have to face personal battles in order to be able to serve, Lord. And when it is time, restraints that are in the way, Lord, I pray that you would move around our schedule for whatever that may mean. If it means switching to a different service opportunity or switching on your schedule, like Brianna was talking about, I pray that you would work in our lives and display to us where exactly we need to move things around in order to best service you. I pray for all of the hearts today, Lord. I pray for all the unsaid prayer requests that are on their backs and on their burdens. I lift them up to you today, Lord, and lay them at your feet. God, be with us as we go out and be the hands and feet of Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Cool. Thank you so much.
No problem.
That was awesome.
My pleasure. I'm glad I got through without hacking up a lung or something.
I know you were talking about coughing, but you didn't really cough all the time. I was like,
Yeah, I was trying to keep my voice from going up and down too much. That way it's just mellow.
I was on a phone call with a church earlier today, and it took like everything in me not to just like
Yeah,
crack
like,
up my lungs while on the phone with them. So I would like talk, and then I'd mute them and let them talk while I cough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back on.
For sure.
But,
I struggle sometimes. All right. You think about something else, Trev?
Nah,
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about something.
Yeah.
But
Jalen,
just
do you mind if I interviewed you real
part of the
quick?
way.
Cool. Come with me. And Emma Kate.